The vampire is probably one of the most recognizable, identifiable characters all around the world. And for most Westerners, most of us think that it's probably Bram Stoker in his novel Dracula in 1897 who creates this notion of the blood-sucking creature. But in truth, the real vampire, the word as well as the legend, comes to us not from Britain, but rather from the Slavic world. Indeed, it's back as far back as 1047 that we get a story in the Russian primary chronicle of a Novgorodian prince who's called in the Russian chronicles a lichiupyr, or a wicked vampire. And it is in this word itself, that comes to us from the Balkans, that we get upyr becomes vampir in East Slavic, and ultimately vampire in the English language later. Although again, in the etymology of this word, we get the notion of to drink up or to drink out. Nowhere is blood mentioned, and yet it's probably from this very word that the modern vampire first begins. Interestingly, it's in the lives of real live people, historical figures from Central Europe, that the vampire story probably really originates. In the 15th century, a ruthless leader of the Transylvanian region, Vlad Tzepes, Dracula, is the figure that becomes the historical vampire for us. And remember, Transylvania is a real place located between Romania and Hungary. But it's the acts of this prince, this Transylvanian prince, who's really what we would call a crusader against the invading Islam, the Muslim Turks, from the Balkans up into Central Europe, that we get this notion of the historical vampire. And indeed, it's probably from his own life that Bram Stoker takes the story of Dracula and certainly gets it as his namesake, the story of Dracula. Between the creative, in a sense, Slavic folklore that we talk about and the historical figures that surround the vampire myth, the subject has now become a really, I'd call it a rich trope in literature, even in the Golden Age, or maybe I should say especially in the Golden Age of Russia. Writers such as Nikolai Karamzin, Alexander Pushkin, considered the greatest Russian writer of all time, Nikolai Gogol, Russia's stand-up comic, and even Turgenev, who writes the novel Fathers and Sons, all of them write vampire stories during their careers. And it's interesting that this trend doesn't even stop during the Soviet period. In the 20th century, the vampire story remains as alive in the Slavic countries as it did when it first began almost 1,000 years ago. The Russians are the very first to produce a silent film in 1908 on vampires, before Murnau does his Nosferatu in 1921. And even in the Soviet period, under the reign of Leonid Brezhnev, we get the amazing filmmaker Ptushko, who does an adaptation of Nikolai Gogol's V, using amazing special effects, very Matrix-like effects in this film from 1967. And so now here we are in the end of the 20th century, the beginning of the 21st century. The vampire story continues on. Modern Russian writers like Victor Pelevin use the werewolf and the vampire to depict political figures as the predator. We get modern pop stars like Nogos Svelo, Linda, Lika, even a rap star named Detzel, who use vampires in their music videos. And in 2004, Russia's highest-grossing film of all time, Nochnoy Dozor, The Night Watch, is released using vampires, light ones and dark ones, again as a metaphor from the 14th century all the way to present day to depict what's happening in the Chechnya region of Russia. And therefore, the film now, this Nochnoy Dozor, Night Watch, is scheduled to be released in the U.S. It already has a sequel in the making that will be released in 2006. In this way, by films such as this, by new literature coming out of Russia, the legend of the vampire continues to live on in the Slavic world.